Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 10, the last episode of Hitler's Circle of Evil, where I'm going to be doing the review and giving you basically my general opinion of the series and of what happened with Hitler's henchmen and the Nazi Party before, during, and after World War II. So, we start in 1945. The episode is called The Meltdown because last episode was known as The Beginning of the End, and in this episode, it's just basically how it all goes to shit. 1945. They start off by saying that everyone, like I mentioned in my last review, everyone knows it's over, but nobody's acknowledging it, right? So it's kind of like this denial of like, no, it's not over, right? And then we're in April 1945, and the Soviets are basically in Berlin. I did a little bit of digging on this point, and it did say that the Soviets first reached Nazi Berlin, Nazi Germany, and before the Allies, and then that's how like a lot of conspiracy theories about Hitler's body came up, and even about Hitler escaping to South America, because I'm gonna get into it later on, but basically like how Stalin, there's a theory that says that, or a conspiracy that says that Stalin didn't want the Allies to know like where Hitler's body was. So he said that like he escaped, and then he said that he was murdered, and then he said he killed himself. So there's like all this. It was basically like misinformation. Anyway, Hitler. They say at this point he's weak physically also, and he has like these sporadic moments where he gets hopeful at times. But the only people, curiously enough, that are there with him are Bormann and Goebbels, right? Everybody else, like Goering and Himmler and Speer, they're out there doing something else. But the people that are staying loyal to him are Bormann, and even more loyal than Bormann, I would say, Goebbels. And it's actually April 20th, 1945, which is Hitler's 56th birthday. So he almost lived to be 60 years old. And yeah, he was 56, so he was almost gonna enter his Virgo stage at 57. Anyway, and these people are making like trips to visit him because he still wants to have a birthday party, since Hitler's birthday parties were always like, a big deal, and everyone would give him presents. Himmler is away. He's doing his back, treacherous negotiations, but he still goes to visit Hitler. This is interesting because the road to Berlin is very dangerous, right? Berlin at this point is all bombed up, but he still makes the passage by road. And it's also dangerous because the SS is assassinating deserters at this point. They say that there was nothing more dangerous than the Nazi Party or the SS towards the end of the war, because they were just basically like killing everybody. So it's dangerous by road, but it's even more dangerous by air. It's suicidal by air, they basically say, because, the air is already surrounded by the Allies. But Speer does it, and I guess that he has to land in like some street or somewhere. Like he can't really land at an airport, right? But anyway, they both get there, and Speer, I guess, along with everybody else, like Himmler and Goering, they all are hoping that they will get like the kingdom, right, or whatever will remain of Germany. And the Führer bunker, which is where Hitler is underground, underneath the Reich Chancellery. The Reich Chancellery, they say, is also bombed out. So it's like a shell of a place, they say. And they actually end up meeting there, and they have like Hitler's birthday party there. Goering is also there. And then Hitler and Eva join. At this point, they say that that's also like a sign of how dire things were, because Eva Braun was normally kept in the dark. But at this point, like, she's out there with Hitler, like whatever. So, Eva was a secret for 12 years, but now Hitler doesn't really care that they see Eva with him. Hitler's weak, and they actually say that this Hitler that used to get people motivated and fired up and passionate, he really can't do that right now because he's like, weak. ever since I think the the last attempted assassination on his life. I think July of the year before, of 44, July 20th or something like that, which we covered in the last episode. So Hitler says that he will stay in Berlin and die if he needs to. And at this point, this is bad news for Bormann because he actually wants to go to the mountains, where the ones that he was in charge of designing after Rudolf Hess delegated that task to him. So Bormann wants to be at the Berghof, but Hitler sees it as unnecessary. He's like, whether we're there or here, we're done for, like, whatever. Even though he still has hopes at times, right, Hitler? So Goering wants to post, to be like the new leader of Germany. And he actually, they say he destroys his estate, like he explodes it. So I guess they had like this, the Nazis kind of had this mentality of like, because Hitler does this with the Nero decree, but Speer doesn't carry it out, where it's basically like, well, if I can't have it, nobody else can have it type of mentality. Then as soon as like the party's done, Goering is the first one to leave, and then Himmler also leaves, so they go back to doing their things. But actually, Goering corners Himmler, and they start talking about like negotiating with the West. Himmler has already released Jewish people at this point. He released 1,200 of them to the Allies, and Himmler actually tells Goering that he's ahead of him, that he's already like negotiating, and he has meetings with people from the Allies. And I guess they say that Bormann overhears this, and that evening, that night, Himmler has two meetings. The first one, he tries to justify his actions against the Jewish people. And in the second meeting, by the time the second meeting comes around, he's already paranoid of Bormann. And he wants to meet Eisenhower, right, to like kind of negotiate. I guess again with this like Rudolf Hess mentality, like we're going to be, larger than life, and, we're very important people, so they got to listen to us, right? Even though they're, at this point, like I think the Allies and the Soviets were angry at them, and they were not having anything from them, right? Like no type of negotiating, like even from Japan, they said like unconditional surrender. Like I think Japan's interesting because they actually allowed the emperor to stay in power, and he actually stayed in power for like decades after World War II. So I guess it was not unconditional, even though it was unconditional from Japan. But that's kind of interesting what happened over there in Japan after World War II. So anyway, he's paranoid. He thinks Bormann, because he overheard, Himmler thinks Bormann's going to kill him, or he sends like assassins to kill him, but that doesn't happen. And now we're on April 22nd, 1945. They have a key meeting. They mentioned the historians in the documentary with the generals, Goebbels, Bormann, everybody, and Hitler. They say that this is the moment that Hitler realizes that they lost. So this is like from here on, like the next 8 days, Hitler basically has no hope. He's like, yeah, and they say this is like, the trajectory from the beer hall to the bunker, right? Which I thought was kind of interesting because it's like, yeah, all of this started in beer halls back in Munich, right? And when it ended, it's ending in Berlin and the bunkers. They also mention how the escape routes are disappearing and the Soviets are closing in. And basically, they start distributing cyanide poisoning for everybody to just take whenever they want, I guess. Bormann wants to stay, but he also wants to go. And they get into like this whole aspect of how they're still playing politics at this point within the Nazi party. Goering is in the mountains, and at this point he hears of like Hitler's, not resignation, but like of Hitler like seeing that the war is basically lost, and he wants that position. He wants to be number one. So he dictates, they mention how he dictates a message to Hitler so he could take the power, right? He says like, well, if you're too, if you can't do it, if you're whatever, like I'll do it. Bormann gets it, and he obviously says that it's betrayal, and it's a disaster for Goering, right? Bormann at this point, instructs Goering, I guess, saying that it's Hitler responding. He instructs him not to do anything, and what Goering ends up saying is like, if I don't hear back from you within 24 hours, I'm taking charge of the government of the German government. Um, and Bormann instructs him not to. He's like, no. And Goering actually resigns, and he says, okay. And the people are told that Goering has had a heart attack and that he can't fulfill his duties anymore. Goering is then arrested, but he gets lucky. He gets a lucky break because the Luftwaffe like sees this, and they actually like rescue him. So I don't know if they started like battling it out here between the Luftwaffe and the, which is Goering's people, and the SS. That would be kind of interesting to know. Um, and Himmler, we like, it kind of jumps back and forth between all these guys. Himmler is awaiting the response from the Allies, and Allies tell everyone about Himmler actually. So this is funny because Himmler's like hoping that his secret will stay a secret, and the Allies just like come out with it in the newspaper, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Himmler's trying to find a way out." So Hitler's obviously angry. So they mention how both Goering and Himmler do different things here, but obviously Himmler is more treacherous, right? In this point. So again, Himmler's arrest is ordered. They want to arrest Himmler. He obviously escapes. He flees. He's nowhere to be found. And Hitler is like super devastated in regards to Himmler because he thought he was loyal. At one point, he called him like the real Nazi or something like that because he would say how loyal like Himmler was. And Goering and Himmler are basically out, and Bormann is happy with this because Bormann is still pretty much playing like the political game. But Hitler wants a new successor. He ends up appointing Karl Donitz, who is in the north of Germany, and he's not a part of the inner circle. And Hitler wants him as his number one. And I guess he appoints him because of some U-boats promises that he came through with, making like the submarines really efficient. And Hitler likes him, and he actually appoints Goebbels his Reich Chancellery, which is like second in command, and he appoints Bormann as the head of the Nazi Party, which is third in command. So he makes the two guys that are in there with him part of his inner circle. He makes them also like leaders. And then Goebbels writes to his stepson, which I guess his stepson does survive, and he lives to be like, he lives, I think, until the 80s. And he writes to him, and it's interesting because Goebbels, his wife Magda, and his stepson are all Scorpios. So yeah, anyway, there's like a communication. He explains his reasons why he's doing it. Magda's also there. And then they go with Eva Braun. They mention how Eva Braun was really outgoing, and they actually end up getting married on April 29th. One of the historians laughs at this part, and I thought it was kind of funny too, especially because he laughs. He's like, yeah, Hitler basically told Eva Braun to leave, and she was like, no. So then Hitler was like, okay, so I'm gonna marry you. And they mentioned that this might have been like one of the saddest weddings possibly in history, because it's literally the day before they kill themselves, and they knew that the end was over, that the end was upon them. So they get married in a conference room, and then yeah, Eva dresses up in a black dress. They get the gold rings from the Gestapo, and the Gestapo gets them from the Jewish people from back at the concentration camps, which I thought was kind of messed up. But yeah, these are the Nazis, so come on, what can we expect? And then as soon as they're married, Hitler leaves, and Eva is celebrating with the secretaries. At this point, Berlin is a disaster. The German people are starving, they're in danger, and they actually start destroying like Nazi evidence. Like if one of their family members was in the Nazis, in the Nazi party or something, they destroy like their pictures, and they're just like, I guess angry, sad, disappointed at everything that's happened. They actually have 15-year-olds fighting Hitler's youth. They're the ones that are kind of defending Berlin at this point, and they say the last 24 hours in the bunk is just smelly. Everyone's drunk. They're thinking of ways to off themselves eventually, and the Soviets are basically a kilometer away. And then Hitler gets the news from Italy that Mussolini has been captured, executed, and hung in public. So he's humiliated. And basically, this is when April 30th, 1945, which is actually my birthday, but in 92, you know, Hitler, like I guess the story is that Hitler shoots himself in the head, and then Eva Braun takes the cyanide poisoning pill. And I guess they did it at the same time, even though the pill I would imagine takes longer. It's not an immediate effect. But yeah, basically they die. And then Bormann checks to see if they died. I guess they mentioned that part. And Bormann's task is to dispose and burn the bodies. And they need to inform the world. So, but also without Donit's permission, which is the new head of state. They're thinking on how to negotiate, like Bormann, Goebbels, all of them. But no, I'm thinking that they don't go into this, but I'm thinking that either the Soviets were like, no, screw yourselves, or they just didn't reply, or they just didn't try hard enough, or I don't really know. But I'm thinking at this stage, nobody was really gonna be hearing the Nazis. They were just like, no, no, like we're not accepting any type of surrender. Like you guys are just defeated, like flat out, you know. I'm thinking, and then Speer hears of Hitler's death. Bormann at this point has lost his power because his power depended on Hitler's or on his proximity with Hitler. They mention quite often, the historians. And then Bormann, you know, he tells Donitz, like, you're the new head of state, but he says that he's going to bring him like written authorization, which is just dumb, the historians say, because he's already told him Hitler's, you know, last wishes. So it's not necessary for him to give him written authorization, but this also gives him an excuse to leave the bunker. So he tries to leave, and then Goebbels and Magda basically end up killing their kids. Magda, they say, for like an hour after that, like she's playing patience, which is solitary. In patience is the name of solitary in European countries. So she's just playing cards with herself. And one of the historians say, well, what would you expect her to do? Like she just did this atrocious act, right? And then Magda and Goebbels both bite pills, and then they take gunshots to the head. And this is also like kind of like what they try to burn their bodies, but there's not enough petrol or diesel or fuel or whatever. So at this point, like Goebbels' body is not, you know, complete ashes. Like his body's still there, and they show like pictures of that. And Bormann, he's the only one that still like remains in power or has some authority. So then we go to Flensburg, where Donitz, the new head of state or the new leader of the Nazis, is there. He's in Flensburg up north. And Bormann still wants like power. He wants to get close to him, and like it's like, bro, like it's over. Like you're going to jail, no? Bormann tries to leave. See, this part they kind of like jump from one thing to the other. They say May 7, 1945. You know, Donitz signs total and unconditional surrender. So Germany completely surrenders on May 7th, even though ChatGPT told me the Soviets reached Hitler's bunker on April 30th, 1945, but I think this is wrong because that's the day that they commit suicide. And I'm thinking that they didn't reach the bunker on that specific day. I'm thinking they reached the bunker maybe afterwards. And then it says the Soviets entered central Berlin in late April, and by May 2nd, Berlin had fallen. But anyway, it's around that time. So what happened? And then they go back to Bormann. So that's kind of like what? Bormann tries to leave, but he doesn't make it because speculation is that outside of the bunker, he saw like the Soviets approaching, and he just kills himself. I guess he shot himself. I think there's a theory that says that he was executed by the Soviets. So again, this with the Soviets, it's not really clear what happened. Anyway, we go forward in time. 3 weeks later, Himmler, Himmler is on the run. He's captured on May 23rd. So like weeks later, and you know, he's going to jail, to court, all this stuff. He actually ends up biting a pill, and he kills himself. Goering is captured, and he's offended that they're not treating him like with honors, because he was like this decorated war hero from World War I, and a socialite, and part of the German elite and whatever. And he still thinks that he can make a deal at this point. But then we hit November 20th, 1945, which is when the Nuremberg trials start to judge all of the Nazis. I think from here, 30 Nazis were picked to be prosecuted, and 11 were hanged. 10 were hanged, and one of them killed himself before he could get hanged, which is actually Goering. Hess and Goering are there at the Nuremberg trials, and Goering is actually still being cocky, and he's like talking all this smack. And then he ends up taking the cyanide pill. Speer gets 20 years in prison, and he's the one that develops the Speer myth. Well, yeah, he's Speer. But the Speer myth is this myth that he tries to basically say that he was one of the good Nazis. See, all of the Nazis, when they get arrested and interrogated, they say that they didn't have knowledge of what was going on, even though like people say, well, you were there, you spoke the language, you heard the conversations, the orders, you knew what was going on. For years and years, you were there. You knew what was going on, exactly. And a lot of it is attributed again to the aggressive invasion tactics of the Nazis, of course, but also the Holocaust, right? The genocide of the Jewish people. So Hess also, Hess, I guess, is the last Nazi to die, and he hangs himself like in the 80s, but he's already like 93 at this point. It's like, why would you wait so long? But I don't know. And then the historian at the end ends up, by saying like only circumstance can create this, right? Because it was, the Nazi machine, but it was kind of weird how it got developed, and what this ultimately means of being able to, or the circumstance creating all of these different situations, is that I was doing a little bit of digging on why Germany was so involved and kind of like the enemy. It's viewed historically as the enemy of World War I and World War II. And how is it that like in a span of 20 years, you're able to go to war twice, like against the world, right? And World War II, I think, has been the biggest conflict the world and in history has ever seen. There were like a lot of people that died. If you want, I can give you like the exact number here. Total number of deaths in war. Right? I looked up this number like a couple of days ago. Yeah, World War II. It's been the biggest global war that has ever been known. 6 years, 1939 to 1945, and between 50 to 85 million people dead. The second one is the Mongol invasions and conquests, and those are 20 to 60 million. And these were with the Mongol empires and various states in Eurasia, but this was over a span of like 200 years, from 1207 to 1405. Yeah, and then the Three Kingdoms War and 34 millions in China, also like 60 years. So yeah, this war was crazy. And I was like, well, why was Germany so bent on doing this? And I started doing a little bit of digging, and I came across these answers that basically say it's because, well, there's a theory that it's because of the arms race that happened right before World War I. And you need to understand that World War II happened because of World War I, right? Ultimately. So you're like, why was Germany so angry? Well, because they were humiliated. And I was like, well, were they humiliated even more during World War II or during World War I? After which war were they humiliated more? And they were humiliated more after World War II, because after World War II, there was no Germany, right? Like the French, the British, the US, and the Soviets took over parts of Germany, and it basically became like, like Germany wasn't allowed. They had to disintegrate all of the Nazism, right? All of the ideology, all that stuff. And it wasn't until like what, 1990 until 1989, 1980, 1989, when the Soviet Union fell, that I guess that Germany was able to be itself again. Right now, I was wondering if there's still like threat or potential threat from Germany, and there isn't, unless we're talking about the alternative for Germany, which is like this extreme right wing party. But right wing movements, right wing parties tend to be at different countries at different moments, because Nazis were ultimately a right wing party, authoritarian and very nationalistic. And you can ultimately find right wing parties with a nationalistic like sentiment, right? They're very national and proud of their nation, right? So in any country, you're going to find nationalistic parties, and those are the right wing, right? Like in Mexico, there's one like Frente Nacionalista, and like over there in Germany right now, there's Alternative for Germany. So they're right wing parties. But yeah, anyway, going back to why World War Two happened because of World War One, and why did World War One happen? Well, they say that besides the arms race where everybody was just gathering up weaponry and they wanted to use the weaponry, um, there's also the idea that like Germany, there were two reasons, and this kind of reminds me of Russia. I'll get into the second reason in a moment. But the first reason is because um, I guess they were jealous of like the British, because the British and the French, if you recall the Americas were basically divided between the French and the British, right? And eventually just the British, and then eventually like they gained their independence. But where I'm going with this is that the French and the British were empires, global empires, right? Like they had colonies all over the world, especially the British, right? During Pax Britannica and all that stuff. Um, and that's actually why they call themselves the Third Reich, because they were the third like power, right? The second power had been like the German unification, which I guess took place like 50 years or 40 years before World War One, which was when Germany unified, because I guess there were these different kingdoms before then, and that was the second empire, the second German empire, and they said that the first empire was actually the Roman Empire, which had been like 1800 years before, I guess. Um, but anyway, they wanted this like expansion, right? They wanted this global power and and all of these like global territories, I guess, since World War One. And in World War Two, that got taken to an extreme, to a racist extreme, where it was basically only the Aryans, the purebred or whatever, pure breed. Um, so they were like, okay, the British got to have all these colonies, they get to have all these things. Why can't we? Right? And I don't know if it has to do with geography, like physically, the territory of Germany is like in Central Europe, and you know how England is an island, and then France is on the border, so they could just come and go. And for Germany, it might have been harder to navigate to different parts of the world. But anyway, that's the first reason. So they were like jealous of France and Britain, and how they got to have like all these territories in the world. And I guess Germany wanted an empire too. And the second reason is because they were afraid that, being in Central Europe and having all of these like superpowers right around them, literally, they had the British, they had the French, and they had the Soviets on the right. They were like, yo, like at any moment, any of these superpowers are just going to come and take us. Which again, now I'm going into Russia. Russia has this mentality right now where they're saying, well, if we give in to like Ukraine, what's to say that they're not gonna, start gaining territory, Russian territory, and then NATO eventually will invade us. And, you know, so again, it's like that fear of like, I'm doing this to protect myself from the potential threats of these people around me, right? And I can understand those two reasons being like the implicit motivators or drivers that ultimately drove Germany to have this mentality of like, not only do we need to protect ourselves, but we actually have to expand ourselves, just like England and France did and do, right? And then I was also thinking about how, I don't know, there was a lot of imperial thinking during that time, right? Like in Spain, they had their Spanish Civil War. There was a lot of fighting going on during those years, not just like in Germany, Italy, Japan, like all of these countries, right? They all wanted like power, territory, resources. And my question is this: even though ChatGPT told me no, did they know? Did they know that eventually there was going to be a new world power, like a new world order? Because I think the idea of new world order comes from Woodrow Wilson back in World War I, and ultimately, after World War II, we see the rise of, the new world order, and especially the United States takes center stage in that, right? So the U.S. Militarily, economically, and culturally is the leader, the world leader, and all of those, the undisputed world leader, right? They say China financially, India, yeah, but I mean, even if you do, you know, beat the U.S. financially, you still gotta beat them culturally, which is a huge influence, and you gotta beat them militarily, which is like, they say the Soviets have, um, you know, the armies in Europe, and this is interesting too. There's so many things with Germany. Like Germany is now restricted, like it can't have big armies. They're only supposed to like support NATO and support the European Union and all these things, the United Nations. Um, and they have like 200,000, between 200 300,000 soldiers supposedly, and so do most of the European countries. Now the US has over I think a million, and so do the Soviet Union, or Russia, but they say that Russia has outdated technology and the US doesn't, so that's like their upper hand, right? But it's interesting how they limit, I feel almost like after World War II, like everyone just got to Germany and was like, whoa, what the hell was going on here? Like, we're going to stay here for the next 40 years and just make sure that nothing like this happens again. um, and I guess it went really bad for Germany, because it was like, Germany, I understand this, like, maybe like feeling of like, what the hell, like, how come everyone's getting a piece of territories and all this stuff and we're not, and also like the fear, or like, the anxiety of like, I have all these superpowers and at any moment they can come and take my stuff. So it's like, yeah, we need to also become like strong, and then just all of that ending up in disaster. In the documentary, they talk about how there were a lot of betrayals and all this stuff, and a lot of like mind games and political maneuvering happening, which I beg to differ. I didn't see much evidence of that. There was fighting, but I would call that like normal fighting. These people were bad, yes, that I do believe in. But, I think the ultimate downfall of the Nazis is that they got too greedy too fast, and they wanted like the expansion to happen like basically overnight, right? A lot happened in those years. A lot of things happened, just in like the last 8 days of right there in the bunker. Like a lot of stuff was happening too. Um, so yeah, but like I was hearing someone say, like, if they would have invaded Poland and Austria, and taken those territories and just kind of chilled, or maybe if they would have just taken France and chilled, and then like regrouped and would have like strategized, or think through their next moves and not just go out, because that was the beginning of the end when they tried to take England, and England defended itself and was like, no, right? So it's like, and then the United States coming into World War II also in 1941 after Pearl Harbor, right? So yeah, there were like a lot of factors that I think contributed to the downfall. And just back to this idea of like, the US, they say that by 1918, 1917, because the US won both world wars. So it said that it was like basically like an industrial powerhouse. It was just pumping out weaponry and machinery for both world wars. excuse me. And in 1940, no, in 1917, during World War One, it actually became the number one economic superpower because of that, right? Because it was giving out loans and all this stuff. So then we jump on over to the end of 1942. Oh yeah, and the League of Nations in 1917, or back in during World War One, after World War One, couldn't really do anything because they didn't have enforcement, because they didn't have soldiers like the United Nations now has soldiers, so they can enforce the things that they want to carry out, and they have like a lot of people, right? A lot of countries are in the United Nations, not like in the League of Nations, where I think like Germany, bails in 1930, Italy too. They're just kind of like whatever. Um, and yeah, in this case, the United Nations gets established in 1945 to avoid these types of disasters, right? So now it would be really difficult to start something like this because there's a lot of diplomacy involved, and there's a lot of oversight to make sure that people don't start like arming themselves to try to take over countries or territories. But ultimately, the U.S. Establishes itself in Europe, starts to spread the idea of democracy. And this is kind of what we see nowadays, right? We kind of see like the US and Europe kind of being like the same thing, right? Even though Europeans are different, but like politically speaking, at least government wise, and the way in which things are done, um, like everyone's represented the same way, right? You see that at like the G20 summits or whatever, where everyone, is wearing suits, ties, everyone's political, everyone's diplomatic, everyone's like, haha, yeah, handshake, hello, friend, hello, everybody, you know, green initiatives and all this stuff. So I think we just have to bear in mind that this happened, not more than 80 years ago. And they say that those that don't learn history are bound to repeat it. But I tweeted recently that it's actually those that remember history repeat it, because a lot of times you see these people, the Third Reich, like this is making reference to history. They knew their history. So it's not like if you know history, then you won't repeat it. It's actually if you know history, you're going to repeat it because you're going to grab onto some ideal, right? Look at Putin with Russia, right? Like the Soviet Union, like my history. That interview that Carl Tuckerson did, Putin just basically talks about that. He just basically talks about history. He gives, I guess they say that he gives Carl Tuckerson a history lesson, right? And it's that the people that know their history are bound to repeat it, right? I think it's actually the people that don't really know history that just like don't care, and they're kind of like not doing anything. But anyway, I think that phrase is wrong. And my last thoughts for the series, the series. Um, I think the series is very dramatic, over exaggerates at times, especially with the homoerotic notions between like Nazi members, and like the infighting. They talk about how there was so much tension and infighting. And I'm like, well, how do you know that? You weren't there. Or what's the evidence, unless you show me the evidence and you tell me, oh, you see here in the diaries, there's at some points they do show evidence. Like they talk about a diary entry from one of the Nazi members talking about like the tension. And I believe there was tension, but they promoted in the series as you're going to see like all of this betrayal and all of these House of Cards maneuvers, and that just really doesn't happen at any point, or at least there's no evidence, there's no clear way of seeing that. Um, but it does a good job at with the actors. The actors are on point. A student of mine that watched the series was also saying, yeah, like the actors do a very good job. You understand everything because as they're narrating, you see the actors playing out their roles, and you even see them like evolve, right? Like the actors start off young, and then they bring in other actors to play them in their older versions. I thought the part where Hitler was fat, maybe it's inaccurate, because I think Hitler didn't get fat. I think he got skinny, because there's a picture of him in 1930, no, in April of 1945, where he's actually like in Berlin and he doesn't seem fat. So I don't know why they would put on like a fat Hitler actor. Um, But yeah, and the narrators, they're good. I think they're all British except for one of them. He's a German guy. But again, I felt like there was a lot of over exaggeration on certain things, like, oh yeah, like all this betrayal and all this cunning manipulation, and it's like, well, you don't really see a lot of evidence for that, so I don't know what you're talking about. But all the historical dates, facts are there. Everything that happens. There's actually a lot that's left out. But this is only about Hitler's henchmen. It's not about the whole Nazi party or Nazi Germany or even Hitler. So it does cover specifically 5 to 6, 7 people, right? And it does a good work. Does a good job on that from the end of World War I to the end of World War II. But anyway, that's my review. If I had to give this series a grade, I guess I would say 9. Just I would take out a point for that. 9 out of 10. I would take out a point for all of that over exaggerating. But yeah, other than that, it's solid. I recommend it. And that's all I got for this last review. So let me know what you think, and I will see you guys. All right, peace.